Hi, my name is Miss Riley, and I'm one of the band directors at North Pontotoc. Being a band director, we're obviously going to be talking about music in this video. One of my favorite things about music, and one of the greatest things about music, is that there's so many different possibilities. I like rock and roll. You might listen to country music. There's also pop music. There's also rap and hip hop and gospel and R&B and techno music. And did I say pop music? Jazz, bluegrass. There's so many different things, and because the reason there's so many possibilities is because there's so many different instruments out there, and that's what I want to touch on today. The reason that each instrument is produces their sound in a certain way. You play it, you blow into it, you strike it, all these good things. Each instrument produces what we call a timbre, Timbre, and that's what makes a guitar sound like a guitar. That's what makes a piano sound like a piano. They sound different, right? It's because their timbre is different. It's because their sound is produced in different ways. We group certain instruments into what we call instrument families. And these instrument families, all of the instruments in that family produce sound similar in a similar way. All right. We're going to talk about 4 different instrument families today. And before I reveal that and what those 4 instrument families are, I want to talk a little bit about how music is, or not music, sound is actually created. Have you ever heard of a sound wave? It's actually, sound is produced in what we call a wave. It looks kind of like those doodles that you doodle in class when you're bored in the little margin, go up and down in a little curve. But they go so fast that our eyes can't see them. They're being produced right now. I can't see them. It's because they're so fast. Our eyes don't catch them, but our ears do. Our ears work better than our eyes. That's why they are seen as sound. We hear them instead of see them. Each instrument produces sound in a different way, which is what I said earlier. So now I guess I can reveal the 4 instrument families. There's the ones we're talking about today are the woodwinds, the brass, the strings, and the percussion. And being a band director and doing this, I see a lot of these, and you will probably see a lot of these in school, and if you don't play them already, and now you might hopefully be able to put a name to some of these instruments. And that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to start with the woodwind family. All right, let's do this. The first instrument family that we are going to talk about, what I just said, is the woodwind family. Bam! The woodwind family, the instruments are played by either blowing directly into the instrument or into a reed. A reed is a piece of wood that vibrates and creates sound when air is blown into it. Kind of looks like a popsicle stick. You slap it onto something, and there's a little bit of space in between the something and the reed, that's where the air goes, and the reed vibrates really fast. And like we talked about earlier, that those vibrations create sound waves, which create sound, which is what produces the instrument's timbre. The first woodwind instrument, and one of my personal favorites, I actually play this instrument, is called the flute. And the flute is the highest pitched normal instrument in the woodwind family. It's super special, not only because it's one of the only instruments in the woodwind family that it's not actually made of wood. It used to be, that's why it's in this family. Back in the olden days, it was just a long tube with some holes on it, and you blew air into it, and that was the flute. But nowadays, we got super fancy with it. It's made of metal. It's also one of the only woodwind instruments that doesn't have a reed. I'm having a multitask, guys, sorry. We play the flute by blowing air over the mouthpiece. The mouthpiece is this little dude right here. You put it up to your mouth, and that hole goes right here, and you blow air across it, and then the air splits. Part of it goes into the mouthpiece, and part of it goes across the mouthpiece. That's what creates the vibrations, and that's what produces the sound waves, which is what produces the flute's timbre. You play the flute kind of like, have you ever had a bottle of soda and you take the bottle up to your mouth where you drink from, and you blow air over it and it kind of goes, congratulations, you're a flute player. All these other fancy things, all of these, you've got this part right here, and you've got this third part down here. All of these kind of connect together. You twist them together to create the one long tube. These things down here and right here, you've got this circle, you've got this circle, and you've got this circle, and then all these different circles down here. They're called keys. And those keys you press down with your fingers, or the musician presses them down with their fingers, and they change what the flute sounds like. The pitch goes up and it goes down, and you can make the flute sound different, but those sounds aren't going to come out unless you're blowing air across the mouthpiece. That little dude right here, okay? The next instrument in the woodwind family I want to talk about is called the clarinet. If you've ever watched SpongeBob SquarePants, you know that Squidward plays the clarinet, but I promise you it sounds better than what he does. The clarinet is the instrument that makes the most sense, I think, when it comes to woodwinds. It actually is made of wood for the most part. Some of the cheaper ones are made of plastic, but for our purpose, the clarinet is made out of wood. It's also played with a reed. You can see in this photo right here, this little dude right here, this brown guy right here, I'm outlining in red, hopefully you can see this, is the reed. It is put onto the instrument, and it's held in place by the larger black circle right here. It's called the mouthpiece. The reed goes right onto the mouthpiece just like that, and it's held together. They're together right here, and then they're tied around by this guy. It's called the ligatures. Sometimes he's made of metal, sometimes he's made of felt, fabric of some sort, but he ties the mouthpiece and the reed together. There's three things in this photo that you need to be aware of: the mouthpiece, the reed, and the ligature, okay? All three of these combine, and the reed and the mouthpiece go into your mouth, or into the musician's mouth, and the musician blows air into this little space right here. The reed and the mouthpiece are kind of separate, and the air that the musician is blowing into this space makes the reed vibrate very quickly, which, guess what? That's what produces the vibrations that turn into sound waves that we hear, and that's what creates the sound or the timbre that we know that Squidward creates, or someone better than Squidward. The clarinet also has keys like the flute does that you can press down to create different pitches. They look a little bit different. The clarinet has these holes right here. These are also called keys, but then some of them that are open like this, like these, sometimes they have silver parts over it. Sometimes, like this one right here, is just a hole. But then also the clarinet has different types of keys that look like little levers, like these down here, these four right here. It's just like the flute. You just press them down with your fingers. The clarinet's played down your body like this. Flute's played up here. And you just press different combinations down that produce different pitches. That's why the clarinet and the flute are in the same families, because sometimes the sounds are produced in similar ways. There are a lot of other woodwind instruments in the woodwind family, but the last one, the third, and the last one that I want to talk about today is the saxophone. The saxophone is very recognizable. We have it in the band here at North Pontotoc. We have it in the band at South Pontotoc. It's used a lot in jazz music. Like the flute, it's made of metal. But like the clarinet, the saxophone has a reed. It's used in the same exact way. We've got the mouthpiece, the reed, and then the ligature that goes around it. You stick it in your mouth and you blow air into the reed. Reed vibrates, creates the characteristic timbre that we know and love of the saxophone. So if the sound is produced the same way with the saxophone as it is with the clarinet, why don't they sound the same? The saxophone you can see in this picture here is a little bit different than the clarinet. It's a little bit bigger. It's not made of the same material. It's shaped a little bit different. The thing I want you guys to take away from this is that the saxophone is larger than the clarinet, and so it's going to sound lower. The bigger the instrument, the lower the pitch. Okay? When you have an instrument that's small, it's going to be high pitched, like the flute. The flute's very small, so it's going to be higher pitched. The saxophone is a larger instrument, so it's going to be a little bit lower pitched. Okay. When we get to other instrument families, we're going to talk about some even larger instruments, and they're going to be even lower pitched. All right. So the next instrument family we're going to be talking about is called the brass family. The brass family is a little bit different than the woodwind family. You still use your mouth and you still blow air through the instrument, but instead of a mouthpiece and a reed, we have just a mouthpiece, but it's a different type of mouthpiece. This is a brass mouthpiece. It's made of metal. It's made of silver, actually, even though it's not made of brass. But that's besides the point. You put this in between your lips and you blow air through it. But watch. Nothing comes out, right? You have to produce the vibrations. So we have to use our lips as the reed and the mouthpiece for brass instruments, because there is no reed like in the woodwind family. So I want you guys to do this with me. Pretend like you just had a really good meal and you're full. And you go, mmm. Okay? So when you press your lips together for that mmm, you feel that tension in the corners. That's what this first step is to producing a sound on a brass instrument. The next part is you have to press your lips together really tightly and blow air through the center of your lips. And it's going to produce what we call a buzz. Can you try that for me? The tighter your lips, the smaller the hole is, and the higher the pitch goes. The lower means the hole is bigger. That's how you get different sounds on the brass instrument. So when you put your mouthpiece up to your face, it makes kind of a weird sound. It probably also tickles a little bit if you've never done this before. Depending on the brass instrument, the mouthpiece can be bigger or smaller. The first brass instrument we're going to talk about today is what this is actually for, is the trumpet. It's the smallest brass instrument that you're going to see, smallest brass instrument we're going to talk about, and therefore it's the highest pitched because it's the smallest, higher the pitch. Let me share my screen. This is what the trumpet looks like. The mouthpiece goes in the top right here where the person is. It attaches to their mouth, and then this is how the musician would hold the trumpet. Where his hands are what we call valves. They look like this. You put 3 of your fingers over 1, 2, and 3, and you press down different combinations to produce different pitches, along with the combination of buzzing. there are only 3 valves. You remember on the woodwind instruments, there are a whole bunch of different keys. So we have to compensate for that by changing the way our buzz operates, high and low, combined with the valves. And that's the trumpet. The next instrument we're going to talk about in the brass family is the trombone. Trombone looks a little bit different than the horn and the trumpet have. We have what we call a slide on the trombone. I think we're sharing my screen. Sorry, guys. This one is the one without valves or rotors. We've got what we call a slide. The slide is held in the musician's right hand, and it goes in and out. It makes the instrument larger the further out it goes, which means it means that the instrument gets lower in pitch. The further in it goes, the instrument gets smaller, so it gets higher in pitch. It sounds like this. It's kind of a funny instrument. It's larger than the horn, which was larger than the trumpet, so we're getting lower in pitch as we're going. It's kind of large, but it's still played with a mouthpiece. You can see it right here in this photo up here, and I'll zoom in on it. Mouthpiece goes right there, connected to the trombone, and that is played just like the other brass instruments, which is why they're all grouped together. You have a mouthpiece and you produce a buzz into these instruments. That's the trombone. The next family of instruments that I want to talk about is the string family. The string family of instruments is what you think. They have strings, normally made of some sort of metal or plastic, depending on the sound that the musician wants to get out of it, the timbre that the musician wants to get out of it. You take these strings and you either strum them, you pluck them, or you use some sort of tool to create a vibration across these strings. The strings vibrate, and that's what produces the timbre or the sound waves, which produce the timbre that the musician or the listener hears with their ears. And that's what all these instruments have in common, is they all have strings which produce the sound. There are a lot of different stringed instruments. I'm going to go through them very quickly because they're all very similar. Oh no, sorry. I think you can see this. So we've got four instruments right here: the violin, the viola. Sorry, I'm not good with this just yet. I'm still working on how to annotate things. The viola, the cello, and the double bass. They're all more classical instruments that you see in snooty orchestras where people wear the suits and things like that. The violins and the viola are played up here on your shoulder. The musician holds them in their left hand, and then their right hand is what's plucking the strings, or we use what we call a bow, which is a long piece of wood with horsehair underneath it, and the horsehair is what goes across the strings to produce the sound. The musician, like valves change the pitch on a brass instrument, and like keys on a woodwind instrument change the pitch, the musician presses down certain places on the strings that make the strings shorter or longer, which make the pitch go up and down. The higher up the string is, the longer it is, and if you get down lower, the higher the pitch is because the string is shorter. So like I said, the violin, the viola, the cello, and the double bass are all more classical instruments. The violin and the viola are played up here. The cello and the double bass are so large that they have to be played in, the musician has to be sitting down, and the cello and the double bass are actually in between the musician's legs. You have the harp here, which is played, it's so large that the musician can use both of their hands to play the strings. The musician doesn't actually have to hold that instrument. And then the one that we all know and love is the guitar. It's right here. These strings are actually nylon strings. They're plastic. It's a more classical sound. You hear sometimes in Spanish and Latin music. The musician holds it across their body, sometimes in their lap, sometimes it's held by a strap across their body so that the musician can stand. Guitars can be electric or they can be acoustic, but all guitars and all stringed instruments use strings to produce the timbre of these specific instruments. And that's the string family. The last family of instruments that we're going to talk about is the percussion family. The percussion family of instruments is super special and super weird. They have a lot of different things involved in this family. The tying factor together, the reason that they're all in this one family is that they're hit or shaken by human hands, okay? The sound comes from people putting their hands together, striking, slapping, shaking the instrument with their actual hands. Sometimes there's a tool used like a drumstick or a mallet. A mallet's a lot like a drumstick, except it's got a little ball on the end made out of different materials. But there's a lot of different instruments that go into this family. There are a lot to cover. Most of the time, these percussionists, which is what people that play the percussion instruments in the percussion family are called, are there in the back of the band. The next time you go to a concert, just look back there. They're doing a lot of different things and moving a lot around a lot, playing a lot of different tiny instruments or sometimes even larger instruments. But the time factor together from the percussion family is that they are all shaken or struck by human hands in some form or fashion. That is the 4 different types of instrument families that we're going to talk about. We've got the woodwinds, normally have a reed and keys to press down to change the pitch of the instrument. We have brass instruments that are made of metal, have a mouthpiece, and the musician buzzes through their lips to create the timbre. We have stringed instruments, the musician strums, plucks, or bows, or uses some sort of tool to make the strings vibrate, which is what produces the timbre of string instruments. And then we have percussion instruments, which are shaken or struck by a hand or some sort of tool, either a drumstick or a mallet of some sort, to produce the timbre of those instruments. These are instruments that you can see in school. We have most of these in the band or in modern day band music in your everyday life. These aren't hard to find. There are other instruments that we can talk about that are more specialized to certain things. But these are just some of the basics of the instrument families and how certain instruments produce timbre.